So last night I had a chance to check out The End of Oak Street, directed by David Robert Mitchell, who also wrote the screenplay for this, starring Ewan McGregor, Anne Hathaway, amongst other people. There's this married couple with 2 kids in 1982 who are living a fairly quiet life in the suburbs, but then certain things start to happen when dinosaurs start roaming their neighborhood, and they all have to figure out a way to survive. I mean, it's not really a spoiler if you've seen the trailers. I do wonder if that would have been a better reveal if they didn't put the dinosaurs in the trailers, but I understand why, because how else are you going to get people's attention to go see this? You know, just watching the previews, I was wondering, is this really what they're doing? Like, they're actually having dinosaurs roaming their neighborhood? I don't know exactly how to articulate my thoughts leading up to it, but there was a certain vibe that I was getting from watching these trailers that it was supposed to be some sort of dumb, schlocky kind of fun, and this movie definitely does offer that stuff. But I figured it was going to be one of those situations like it was M. Night Shyamalan's The Happening, where once we go into the theater and we see just how awful the dialogue and the acting really is. That's what I was kind of worried about, but then hearing some of the reviews of it, I thought, okay, maybe it's worth checking out. And sure enough, to my surprise,
I must say, damn good stuff, sir.
That was different and wild. I'm not going to go into too much spoilers about the plot because I feel like this is a movie that you have to experience for yourself. But there's not like a huge big reveal like the Sixth Sense twist or something from the lines of The Prestige by Chris Nolan. But what I will tell you, mild spoiler warning for any dog lovers out there, he doesn't die. I say again, the dog doesn't die.
We can only thank God for that.
I've seen other reviews talk about how this is like an amalgamation of different story tropes or certain plots from other films like E.T., Jaws, Close Encounters, Jurassic Park, all creating an original premise. I mean, we've seen dinosaurs before in movies, Jurassic Park and the Jurassic World series. That's not new. A survival horror premise of some kind? Again, that's not new either. But similar to last year's Sinners, it takes all these different elements of certain movies that we've seen before, telling its own story. Now, I'm not saying that this movie's on the same level of quality as Sinners. This is very pulpy and dumb, schlocky kind of fun, as I was talking about earlier. But there's also a certain self-awareness that I picked up on anyway, where the movie doesn't try to be anything more than what it already is. It's a very simplistic plot of getting from point A to point B while dealing with all of these scary threats along the way. And you have characters that may or may not be walking, talking cliches in some ways because they're going through certain things. In the first 20 minutes, we do get a good sense of what this family dynamic is like. McGregor and Hathaway play Greg and Denise, who are somewhat starting to be on the rocks in their marriage, and they're starting to wonder, is this going to be salvageable in any way? While their kids, Audrey and Brian, have their own hopes and their own activities that they're worrying about. It's the usual setting up certain characters in a family dynamic in order for us to care about them when everything hits the fan. That being said, I found those first 20 minutes or half hour to be kind of rocky, not in a bad way or anything. Admittedly, I was thinking, okay, am I gonna buy this? And for me, inevitably, I was able to. If some people are not, I totally understand. Because there are some interactions that these characters have where I go, okay, I've kind of seen this before. But for me, it was all done very tastefully, and I found myself fairly invested in this family unit and how they were going to get out of this. The biggest comparison for me was M. Night Shyamalan's Signs, where Mel Gibson's character and his brother are looking after their 2 kids, trying to survive an alien invasion. Only with this one, dinosaurs. Bingo. Dino DNA. But even with all that set up, there is some sort of exposition going on in the background as a subtle hint to what's eventually going to come. We hear some radio broadcasts about what's going on in outer space and how it eventually leads to these white flashes of light occurring in their neighborhood. Very similar to this one moment in War of the Worlds of Tom Cruise when this lightning flash goes on outside and they start to realize that this is not the lightning that they encountered before. This is something else. But as far as the characters, even with all the cliches that are thrown in here, it's all done, like I said, very tastefully. I buy that this is a family dynamic, even if I've heard some people argue that Ewan McGregor's character Greg is too much of an annoying optimist. I am an optimist and I tend to look on the bright side most of the time, but even I was going, dude, I'm not so sure about this right now. You might want to think twice about that. But what you have in Ewan McGregor and Anne Hathaway, this feels like an authentic couple, and even one from the 1980s. There was a lot of stuff going on behind the closed doors, obviously, with a lot of married couples back then, even further back in the 70s or 60s, where everything seems to be going fine on the surface, but behind the eyes or behind the curtains, every married couple is going to have some trouble one way or another. And I think this is a reminder for us who tend to look back at the past with a rose-tinted view. It wasn't that different compared to today. Even if it was a lot of different technology, human beings are gonna human, whether we like it or not. But there are some serious things that these two characters have to hash out with each other, and at one point we do see an argument between the two of them about how they're feeling about where their marriage is going. No specifics or anything. It feels very raw and intense, even for a movie that has a lot of cliched elements from the emblem era of entertainment when it comes to Steven Spielberg's E.T. or Close Encounters. Now, my experience with Ewan McGregor, the Star Wars prequels, Kenobi, the Robots movie from 2005, I haven't seen Moulin Rouge, admittedly. Not a huge Baz Luhrmann guy, but that's a different story. I actually quite like him in this role, and it was a little hard for me to separate the fact that it was Ewan McGregor in a movie. Maybe it's because I'm so used to him as Obi-Wan that I half expected him sometimes to go, hello there. But even with his sometimes annoyingly giddy optimism, similar to Chris Evans' Captain America, he has a way of keeping people grounded as far as, no, stay focused on what's important. We can get through this. As for Anne Hathaway as Denise, she's the most grounded and sometimes maybe too cynical of a counter to Greg's optimism, but she's carrying a lot of baggage underneath the surface, barely holding it together. And when this dinosaur situation occurs, it only further compounds those feelings that she has, causing them to boil up from under the surface. 2026 is undeniably the year of Anne Hathaway. Devil Wears Prada Part 2, The Odyssey, End of Oak Street, and now she's got some movie coming up soon with Dakota Johnson. This lady is once again on a roll. I mean, she won an Oscar for Les Miserables many years ago. I hope and pray to God she gets one more, because this woman, she deserves it. And I've been following this lady for 25 years, ever since she showed up in Princess Diaries. Wait, did I just say that? It's been 25 years?
Shut up!
And of course, you may notice I'm wearing this Anne Hathaway Catwoman shirt. She is still the best Catwoman. I don't give a shit what anybody says about that. And with my Eagles hat, as I have been wearing lately in some of my videos, she's also an Eagles fan. So,
I love her.
Alright, all that aside, she really is a fantastic actress, and there's a moment where she does lash out on one of her kids. I'm not going to say what happens exactly before then, but it's one of those things where she just blows up after one too many pokes that are basically innocent pokes from her kids. Mom, what about this? Mom, what about that? And she loses it. She blows her top at her son, only for her to realize pretty quick that she shouldn't have said that, giving her son a hug and apologizing. Certain actors or actresses might be tempted to go over the top with the crying and the screaming and just like really go insane with that kind of response, but this to me on my end feels very natural and raw. So Miss Hathaway, my hat's off to you. And by the way, those two kids, including their one friend Jeanette who shows up later on, miraculously are not annoying. Most of the time I'm able to let it slide with child actors because I've heard some people that I used to follow are very impatient with kid actors because they don't really have the skills to match what the adults are doing. Basically, either get good or get out type of attitude. I'm not like that personally, but I understand why people are easily annoyed by kid actors. In this situation, these kids actually feel authentic, similar to the kids in Jurassic Park or even Jaws. Or even like The Goonies, The Sandlot, E.T. or Super 8. Another Amblin-inspired piece of entertainment, but different discussion. And it just occurred to me, J.J. Abrams is a producer for this. I wonder how it would have felt like if he was behind the director's chair as far as actually calling the shots. Not to take away from what David Robert Mitchell did. And I haven't seen It Follows, admittedly. I know it's a really big horror film that he's known for, and there are some horror elements that he's actually really effective with utilizing here. Like this one sequence that happens where Ewan McGregor has to avoid this one dinosaur, and we don't really see the dinosaur, we just see the bushes or things getting knocked around or getting knocked over. Very similar to Jaws, and how it all plays into the eventual reveal of the dinosaurs. And there were a couple times where I had to close my ears because that jump scare sound or that jump scare music, I cannot stand that trope in any movie, period. I hate that. But there is one sequence that I swear to God I'm gonna have nightmares about for a while, involving a snake.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
Dr. Jones, if you saw this snake, you would melt into a puddle of water. And since I mentioned that, the production design and the look and feel of the 1980s, David Robert Mitchell does a fantastic job of recreating the feel of that era. Because there have been times where I think that certain movies are set in the past, like the 1980s, but it feels like they're set in our modern era, or like the 2010s, or the 2020s, or 2000s, where it could have just felt like any time that we're living in right now. But this one actually feels like we're set in the early 1980s. And there's a couple of items that are set up in the house or the neighborhood where it's pretty clear that this is the same era of the original Superman with Christopher Reeve. There's even a poster for 2001: A Space Odyssey. By the time of the 1980s, it had already become a classic. Now, I mentioned this being pulpy, schlocky fun. Admittedly, though, Again, I'm trying really hard not to go into the spoilers, but there are some things in this movie that I found kind of dumb or just left me scratching my head. There's one instance where this big dinosaur comes in towards a group of people. Right until the moment it gets about 10 yards or 10 feet away from them, they don't even hear this coming. It's one of those things where you see it in the background and it's walking right towards them. It's not making really any big sound to alert the characters that are standing right there. It's like, hello? Hello, right there. And this was also pointed out by Austin Putnam, just to be clear. I don't want to sound like I'm copying off of what he was saying. And also, as I mentioned, with the different elements of certain movies, and this being set in the 1980s, this does in a lot of ways feel like a love letter to that era of cinema. Sometimes you could argue whether or not it does work against the film. Even though it's mostly its own premise, there are a couple times where I thought, it's a little too similar to that movie, but not to the point where it took me out of it, if you know what I mean. And as far as how all the dinosaurs are here, again, no specifics if you don't want to know. There is enough of an explanation or some theoretical ideas that are explored by certain characters or expressed out loud where I say, okay, I don't know if that would totally make sense, but how it's presented here, I can buy this. I think I can roll with this. Thankfully, the movie's not so wrapped up in trying to explain the logic and how this all occurs. Whereas in other movies, I feel like if they tried to get too lost in the sauce of how all this stuff works, and then people would start to groan and say, okay, now you're really starting to fall apart at the seams. It's a similar problem that people have with Signs. As far as the water and the aliens, I don't like using this phrase, but if you know, you know. This movie thankfully doesn't have that problem, but I would not be shocked if there's some people out there who decide to make it a big deal. Then again, it's a movie, so what do I know? And if you say you do know how stuff like this works scientifically, newsflash, you don't really. As for the look of the dinosaurs, there's a huge emphasis on them having more of a furry look or some sort of feathery look. This one emphasizes more or less how they would look if we actually saw them with our own eyes, instead of genetically engineered theme park monsters, as Alan Grant says in Jurassic Park 3. And probably another issue that I have, it's not that big of a deal, but I understand that the budget of this film doesn't really allow for that to happen. Some of the effects on the dinosaurs mostly look very good. There are a couple of shots, though, with certain ones, like in the third act, where they looked a little bit questionable, and I thought, you could have cleaned up those effects just a little bit, or maybe hid them in the shadow somehow, so that way we wouldn't be able to notice that. Again, I think this is a small budget type of film in comparison to other big releases that we have, so I'm not expecting something like Jurassic Park or anything, or maybe it probably wouldn't have hurt to have a practical shot of one dinosaur, or maybe two walking around if you had it available. But I don't really like to get focused on that kind of stuff, to be honest with you. I'm able to just let that go, but there were, admittedly, like I said, a couple shots where I thought, looks a little iffy. So yeah, the end of Oak Street, I don't really know what else to say about it other than go check it out if you have the opportunity, because I don't know if it's going to be truly special depending on how the box office run for this goes. I mean, it's already going up against Odyssey and Spider-Man Brand New Day. I cannot advocate for those two movies enough. If you have the opportunity to see those two, go check those out as well. Maybe include this in here as well, because there is way too many people out there who scream, we want more original films! And this was also pointed out by Zach Pope. And there were a couple of YouTubers that I used to watch back in the day who would demand originality all the time. And a lot of times when that would come around, they would trash it. Not going to call out anybody specifically, but don't miss out on this opportunity if you have it, okay? It's not entirely original, but just like Sinners, it tells its own story. That's all I have for you guys on the end of Oak Street. Thank you all so much for watching. Just let me know what your thoughts are down below on this film if you've seen it. Hit like and subscribe if you'd like to see more from me. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next one. Later!